Nearly 25 years ago, I was living at my parents' old two-story house in the middle of farmland in Florida. They had both moved to a bigger city and were still trying to sell the old farmhouse. I was about 20 and too old to move with my parents to their new place, so they let me stay at the house by myself until they sold it. This allowed me to finish college and save the money I made at my PT job. It was about my third month being there alone. It was about 11:30 p.m. I was reading in my bed upstairs and I heard a loud banging on the door. I walked out of the room and looked over the balcony at the front door, and I saw someone staring up at me through one of the side stained glass panes. It was a man in his 30s. I've never felt such a surge of panic. I called my uncle and it rang and rang. I grabbed the .357 Magnum that my dad had left for me and told me 1,000,000,000 times to keep close to me at all times, and I called 911. Once the dispatch operator was on the phone with me, the guy was kicking at the door, one loud kick every 10 seconds. The 911 dispatcher told me someone would be there in less than 5 minutes and advised me to tell her which room I was in. I was terrified and I could hear the doors starting to crack. I put the phone down and cocked the .357 Magnum and stayed at the top of the stairs. He kept kicking, and as the door was about to give way, he looked through the stained glass window again, right at me. I pointed the gun at him, and he made this expression that I can only describe as excitement. He kicked, and the door gave way and slammed open and broke the window pane. He ran up the stairs, and as he took the first 2 steps, I stood up and shot him right in the stomach. He yelled and fell back and hit the foyer floor and started moaning non-stop, writhing. I stood like a statue with the gun pointed at him until the cops arrived. And when the first officer entered the front door, I pointed the gun at him and he screamed at me to drop it. For some reason, I lowered the gun but couldn't let go of it. He said that everything was gonna be okay, but I had to let go of the gun. A few minutes later, an ambulance pulled up, and for some reason, it wasn't until I saw paramedics that I put the gun down and started crying. The man died en route to the ER that night. The officers told me he had a rap sheet a mile long. He also had a .45 in his glove compartment. They took me to the police station, and my parents drove back that night and took me to their new home. The house sold a month later, and I never stayed there alone again. My uncle was gone for the night to visit his other farmlands in Okeechobee. I don't really think about this event anymore. It takes a specific inquiry for me to remember it. I now have a concealed carry .38 special that I always keep in my purse, and I would never give that up. So this occurred many years ago, but it will forever stay with me and change my views on allowing my kids to ever have their own separate phone line. It was a few weeks after Christmas. My parents had gotten me my own personal phone with my own separate phone line, because that was the cool thing back then, before the cell phone was big. And I'd given my friends the number because who wouldn't, right? Anyway, it was about 3 a.m. and I had been sleeping when my phone begins to ring. I thought, that's odd. Who can be calling this early? We all have to be up for school in the morning. So I answered it, but all that could be heard was breathing on the other end. I laughed it off as someone just messing with me and hung up. I tried returning to sleep, but my phone rang again. And this time I answered it and said, "Who is this?" Nothing, just breathing again. At this point, I was beginning to get irritated. I told him to stop calling me and hung up. I lay down again for about 30 minutes when my phone rang for yet the 3rd time that morning. I was mad, so I answered and said, "This isn't funny, I'm trying to sleep. I have school in the morning, stop calling me." This time, there was a reply. It was a man's voice. It sounded very gravelly, and he laughed and said,
"I can see you. You're very pretty. Why don't you come out and play in the snow with me?"
And with that, I hung up and started crying. I ran to my parents' room and woke up my mom, telling her what happened. She woke my dad up and made me tell him what had happened. So they both get up, and my dad goes into my room and checks the windows and everything, makes sure all the locks are on and all the doors are locked, and proceeds to tell me it's just someone playing a sick joke and that everything will be fine. And then he told me to just unplug my phone from the outlet. So I finally go back to sleep until my mom wakes me up for school. I get up and start getting ready, open my blinds to the window that leads to the backyard, and noticed on this very frosty morning that there were handprints all over my window. I called my parents in there, totally freaked out. My dad immediately calls the police. The police come out to take a report and look at the evidence. They decided they want to go to the backyard. And sure enough, there were a set of footprints in the snow that led right up to my window. They had gone from the front of the house to the back to my window, and back to the back door and back to the front door. And the police think the guy had tried to get into the house.
Stranger Stories. This story happened years ago, but that doesn't stop me from thinking about it every now and then. I was about 13 or 14 and was babysitting 2 boys for some church members. I had done it before, the kids loved me, and the parents were very comfortable with me. This was a night where they were going to be gone until about 2:30 in the morning. I was doing it for free that day because they were going to do something church-related, and that's just how I rolled. Anyway, the place they lived in was an apartment complex. You know, one of those small ones that had 2 floors. They were on the bottom floor. It was around 1:30 a.m., and I knew they would be getting home soon. The kids were already knocked out. I grabbed a couple of DVDs to watch to make the night go quicker. I was already very tired and had drifted in and out of sleep a couple of times already. All of a sudden, I hear knocking on the front door. Knowing the parents had a key, I did nothing but sit there in the dark with the TV glowing. Being a paranoid person who's seen enough horror movies, I grabbed the baseball bat that was next to the couch. What happened next will haunt me forever. I heard a low voice, almost like a young woman's whisper.
"Oh dear, that won't help you."
My heart stopped. I realized the patio door didn't have the blinds shut. My eyes shift slowly to the door, and I see someone on the patio staring right at me. I couldn't make out anything other than that they were very short and wide. I screamed and ran into the kids' room. Thankfully, they were still asleep. This was before I had a cell phone, and there were no cordless phones in the house. All I did was push the dresser in front of the door and stared at the one window of the room, hoping not to see anything through it. A shadow loomed on the window. The knocking started again, and the woman's voice called out,
"Come on, dear, I won't hurt you. Please, come out."
The window was being knocked on so hard I was afraid it would break. The kids woke up screaming and horrified by the loud knocking. Knowing I had 2 young, terrified kids with me, I became vulnerable and afraid. Within 2 seconds, I hear the father yell out,
"Hey, who the hell are you?"
and the person running away. The front door opened and there was a harsh knocking on the kids' bedroom door. Thankfully, it was the parents. I let them in and put the dresser back. I explained what happened, and they called the police. When they arrived, they found nothing but the bushes that hide the patio, cut up and ripped, possibly for whomever it was to get through. The family moved away about 5 months later, and I never babysat anyone ever again. I know the woman was long gone, but to this day, every time I hear a knock, a chill runs through me.
I was 12 and out trick-or-treating with my best friend who was also 12. Back in those days, it was not unusual for older children, including females, to be unescorted by adults. We lived in an older area, now a suburb of a major city, suitably dressed in costumes and, as usual, running along excited. We were several blocks away from either of our homes. We didn't know anyone on this particular block, but the houses were mostly well lit with front porch lights, and many had carved pumpkins on the steps or near the door, one of the main signs that the household was giving out candy. I remember where this particular house was, on 4th Street, about midway on the south side of the block. In this area were some houses of the kind built by earlier settlers before city codes, often somewhat odd, with different parts added later on. Anyway, we get to this one house, and it has a walkway to the right of the house. This leads to a few steps up to a door, but the door is wide open. My friend and I pause on the steps, a bit uncertain. Of course, we had been warned not to go inside any houses, but this is what, an extra long porch? We see a long empty hallway that appears to be built along the side of the house. It's odd, but the hallway, or porch if it was, is very well lit, and at the end of it was another door, beside which are 2 carved pumpkins. This is obviously the trick-or-treat door, so after a brief hesitation, we forged ahead. We knocked on the second door, and a woman, maybe in her 30s, ordinary looking and not too friendly, opened it, gave us some candy, and then shut the door. We had turned around and were halfway back down the long hallway, when suddenly, out stepped a man who had been hiding behind the open first door. He shut the door and stood in the front of the closed door, blocking our exit. My friend and I froze in our tracks. The man, probably also in his 30s, medium-sized and average-looking, stood for a few seconds not saying anything, but seeming to enjoy the effect he was having, namely having scared us speechless. Well, it was Halloween. A scare and then a laugh maybe might be okay, even expected. Perhaps from someone's goofy dad or uncle pranking it up. There are lots of haunted house setups after all. But this guy just stood there, blocking the door and not saying anything, and staring at us with a smug, creepy smile. Finally he said,
Don't you know you're not supposed to walk into strangers' houses?
but he still didn't move away from the door. We continued to stand there, frozen, not saying anything. After some more freaky silence, he said,
So, what are you gonna do now?
I knew the way he was looking at us was more than a scary prank. It was creepy and weird. I don't know what my friend was thinking, but I was thinking if he doesn't open that door very soon, I'm gonna run back and pound really hard on the second door until that woman answers it. This happened maybe for only a couple of minutes, the creeper gloating and leering at us while blocking the door, but it seemed much longer. Finally he stepped over, grabbed the handle, and disappeared behind the back of the now open door. We bolted out of there like a pair of jackrabbits. My friend and I looked at each other as we ran away, but we continued on our trick-or-treat mission down the street. We never discussed how weird it was later, and we never told our parents.
My name is Danny, I'm 22 years old, and this was the most horrifying experience of my life. I live and work in New York City, but I don't have a car, so my main mode of transportation is the subway. It was a Saturday night. I was on my way home from a party in the middle of the night. I did this about every other weekend, so I was completely fine with taking the subway alone at night. Walking down the steps, entering the underground without a soul in sight, it was always a bit chilling. This specific station was very tightly spaced. As I was walking, I could almost feel as if I were being watched or followed. along with the occasional echoing bang type sound emitting from an unknown location. I was early for the train, so I sat on a bench and waited. This is something straight out of a horror movie. I heard this exact phrase. "Psst, over here, buddy." There was somebody standing on the tracks inside the tunnel, poking his head out and looking at me. It was a filthy looking man, I'd say in his early 40s. He gave me a smile, a horrible yellow smile with at least 3 teeth missing, and I could tell that even from where I was sitting. I did the best I could to pay no attention to him, but he wouldn't go away. There was laughing coming from inside the tunnel, and then another disgusting looking man stuck his face out as well. This man gave me a nasty smile as well, before telling me to come hang out with them in the tunnel. The way they stared at me though, their eyes wouldn't even move. It's as if their sight was locked onto me. I resumed doing the best I could to ignore them and just wait for the train. I noticed in my peripheral vision that one of the men moved away into the tunnel, returning moments later with another face. I had to look again. There was a third face, but this one was hunched over and lifeless. It looked like one of the men were holding the guy's face up. The sound of the train approaching felt like 1,000 pounds off my shoulders. I got up ready to board the train, but when I got closer to the edge of the platform, I nearly threw up at the sight. The 2 men were going back into the tunnel, but the second man in the back was holding something in his hand. A head. Just a head. Like a decapitated head. They disappeared from sight onto the side of the tunnel. As the train stopped, I got into the first car, planning on warning the conductor, but no later than after we left the station. I didn't want to be there a second longer. As the train began to move, I saw legs moving down the stairs to the platform, but that was it. I didn't get to see who it was. But what I did get to see, as the train moved into the tunnels, I caught a glimpse of a group of men, hunched up against the railing, inches away from the train window, and they were all looking right at me. I knocked on the conductor's door like a madman, screaming it was an emergency. He opened up and I explained what I just saw. He radioed to somebody in charge of the station, as well as another higher-up of the company, who I'm sure took care of it, or contacted the proper authorities or security, whatever. It seemed to take ages for my stop to come, but when it did, I practically had a hop in my walk from relief. I have since been to one party at the same friend's house, but I skipped that station. I decided it was worth it to take the extra long walk to the next station. I don't know if weird shit happens often in the subway at night. In my experience prior to this incident, it never did. But after this experience, I think I should say you should be extremely cautious when in an isolated place like a subway station late at night.
3 days ago, I had an encounter with one of those crazy clowns that everyone's hearing about lately. Most people are running into them on the road in the safety of their cars. I, however, had a much more disturbing encounter. I live in Massachusetts. My property is enclosed by trees with a long, winding driveway leading to the road. During the day, I was cutting down a drooping branch from a tree above the entrance to my property. That's when I first saw him. A clown. Or a guy dressed as a clown, I should say, walking down the side of the road and stopping very slowly right at the center of the start of my driveway. He very gradually turned his head to face me, body still facing the road. I had to give him credit, his clown costume was terrifying, the mask looked horror movie status. I chuckled to myself and smiled in his direction. Judging by everyone else's experiences, I was expecting him to start bluff charging me, but he didn't. He just turned his head back to the road and kept walking. I would have said something, but I guess I just didn't care enough. That night I did my usual locking up of the shed outside and shutting off all the lights. When I got inside to start making dinner, I thought I heard something coming from outside. I opened the kitchen window a little more, but all I could hear was the wind and leaves blowing. I shut the window completely now and resumed making the food. I almost had a heart attack when there was a heavy, aggressive knocking coming from that same window I just shut. My whole body immediately went into panic mode. I felt every body part shaking, and my heart thumping twice as much than usual. I took the knife I had sitting on the counter and brought myself to look out the window, but it was literally too dark to even see past the glass. Once again, I struggled to sum up the courage to do something I felt needed to be done, which was this time to turn on the patio light and go outside. So I walked over to the back sliding glass door in my kitchen, put my finger under the light switch, afraid to flick it, waiting for a good 5 seconds, and finally did it. The horror I was afraid to experience out there came prematurely before I could even step outside. The patio light exposed the same clown from earlier, standing right outside the sliding glass door, head tilted like a dog staring at me behind the ugly mask. I could have and probably should have opened the door there and then and stabbed the guy, or at least threatened him, but it's so easy to think back and say I should have done that. Instead, I simply ran upstairs to the telephone where I called the police. I could hear banging on the heavy glass door downstairs all the way up from my bedroom, and it got worse as the clown started pounding with both hands repeatedly as opposed to the slow and steady knocking he was giving before. It got the worst when the clown started screaming like a psychotic asylum patient over the sounds of the pounding on the door. I felt like I was going to die. Literally every minute that went by that the cops hadn't arrived yet felt like 5 minutes. The screaming and banging finally came to a stop when I heard a familiar voice outside yelling, "What the hell are you doing, and get the fuck out of here." I looked out the window to see Marv, my neighbor, walking over with a rifle in his hand. When I went outside to greet and thank him, he told me the clown ran off into the woods. The cops arrived briefly after that and took down my description, did a quick 5-minute sweep of the property, and left. Marv let me crash at his place for the night just in case. We don't play with shit when it comes to our well-being and safety. So yeah, at the time I'm sharing this, that was only 3 days ago, in the midst of all this clown horror.
Stranger Stories.
This story just happened last night, and I don't know exactly what to make of it. Regardless, what happened yesterday will stay with me for a long time. I'm an 18-year-old dude who lives at home with his mom. We live in the same neighborhood as my grandma's house. It was a typical Thursday. I got home from work and had my usual routine. A shower, some video games, a little weed, and dinner. About a minute later, I thought I heard tapping on my window. The tapping was so low and inconsistent that I just shrugged it off. I felt slightly paranoid, so I turned on some music to distract myself. No more than 2 minutes pass, and I hear my back door open. We always kept the spare key in the lock, which jangles every time the door's opened. I turned my music off and sat in silence. I couldn't hear anything. I know someone just opened it. I know someone was inside my house. I could feel it, but couldn't hear footsteps, a voice, or anything. I grabbed the knife I keep in my desk drawer and sat in complete silence. I thought to myself that if I acted like I had the upper hand, whoever it might be will be intimidated or scared. I stood up and walked out of my bedroom, knife in hand. I don't know why, but I whistled just one note. I took a few steps forward, stopped, and whistled once more. Still thinking I was acting tough, showing no fear. Needless to say, by this point, I was terrified. I was about to take a few more steps when I heard something that made a chill run through my spine. Someone just whistled back at me. Sounded like it came from the living room. I was frozen in fear. I peered around the corner and saw nothing. The door was closed, but unlocked. I don't know if it was me who left it unlocked, I truly couldn't remember. Knife or not, I was extremely scared and ran back to my room. A few minutes pass, and the door opens again. My mom is back. I don't know why, but I didn't say a word to her about just what happened. I have no idea who it was, where he was, or if he ever left.
I live in a place called Polk County, a county in Central Florida whose reputation definitely precedes it. So one day, cruising around North Lakeland, me and some friends found what seemed to be the biggest abandoned building any of us had ever seen. Us being stupid teenagers decided to go smoke some weed and play manhunt inside. When I describe this place, I can only think of the words eerie and morbidly terrifying. We didn't care though, it was the coolest thing we'd ever seen in our small town lives. But to get to the story, we were going down a corridor with a dead end. We got to the end room and we heard what sounded like a metal pot get thrown in the hallway. Terrified, we all grabbed whatever's closest to us for a weapon. The only suitable weapons in that damn room were a stack of canned beans. So we all grabbed a can of beans and ran down the hallway to the exit side. You have no idea the things going through my head at this point. The scary part is, we checked every room in that hallway. After a few seconds, a voice calls out. We exchange some words with some guy and finally he says,
You want a cigarette?
My friend, being an idiot, says, Oh, he's chill, come on, and start walking down the hallway back to the guy. I called him an idiot and he agreed, so then we started leaving. We came through a window in a room near the end, so as we were walking back into that room, I was the last one in. I kid you not, I look up as everyone get in the door, and I see a man start around the corner at the other end of the hallway. My heart stops. He's got something in his hands, and I look down and it's a handsaw. So I burst into the room and the first person isn't even out of the window yet. So I'm shoving everyone out the window. They all have no idea what's going on and I had no time to explain. I just said to run. So everyone gets out and I'm the last one climbing out. I'm halfway out and I look back at the door, and there he is, standing right at the entrance. It's the scariest thing to ever happen to me, hands down. So, when I was young, I went to that one house in town where the residents went all out and probably spent thousands of dollars getting the place perfect for Halloween. I remember feeling terrified even with my double lightsaber. Even though I was scared to death to walk through it, I always admired the workmanship. So, as I nervously crossed the yard, past flying banshees and impaled corpses, I noticed the main attraction at the end of the line. There, on what I guess was probably the driveway, was a bottomless pit attraction. The illusion bewildered and chilled me. I must have stared at it for a while when suddenly I heard a cough and a low hushed voice to my right. I don't remember what was said, but I want to say it sounded something like,
Hey, check this out.
Or,
Hey, I want to show you something.
in a gruff, hoarse tone. I looked over, and at first saw nothing but the wide gate to what was clearly the inside of the owner's house. There was just a faint amount of the light from the glowing pit to illuminate the outlines of the gated fence. After adjusting my eyes, I noticed a figure standing completely still. In fact, it was so still, I remember thinking it was just another static prop. My young mind just didn't register a lot of this and was still looking for the voice I heard, not realizing it had come from the figure who I could still only barely make out. After a few moments, I heard the voice again. I realized it came from the figure and began to approach it. This was obviously a stupid idea, but in comparison to everything else that was happening around me, this figure seemed anything but imposing. So I cautiously approached the figure, trying to make sense of it. Suddenly, the figure began to move and consequently, I froze solid. The light from the amber glow lit up its face just enough for me to make out its features. This, I remember clearly. He was a scraggly and rough-looking man with a coarse, gray beard and yellow teeth. His weathered and tattered clothing looked like it hadn't been cleaned in ages. Though I had no idea why, but it unsettled me greatly under the hellish glow of the light bulb behind me. It felt wrong. It was as if that moment I had acquired some clarity and realized his presence here obviously was not part of the show, and considering I already saw the owners clearly did not belong on the property. I screamed and ran out of there as fast as I could to the exit, not looking behind for a second. I probably got a few looks from the kids around, but I never went there again. I was walking from a friend's house to meet my son's father at a bar we frequented in those days. It was winter, icy and snowing with giant piles of snow all around. I was walking from a friend's house around 9 p.m. down an alley that served as a driveway area for many houses. I was wearing my apocalypse boots, waterproof, knee-high, and just winterproof in general. I usually have headphones in blaring music while I walk, but that night, for some reason, I decided not to. In hindsight, that is what saved me. There's a younger guy, early 20s, walking about 50 feet behind me.
Hey, you!
I turned around and it seems he's talking to someone else.
Hey!
I look back and then continue walking.
Yeah, you!
I start to walk faster as I realize he's getting closer. Ahead of me, I see an SUV running, backed out of a parking spot but blocking my path. I turn around and there's another guy. The door to the SUV opens and there's a couple of guys in it looking at me. One gets out and stands by the door. I turn to look at the guy behind me, and out of nowhere, about 5 more guys come out, surrounding me from a distance and slowly closing in. The realization that they were hiding behind piles of snow hits me. A couple of them had their phones out and were recording something that was about to go down. They were closing in on me, trying to get me to walk to the SUV. Fight or flight kicked in and I decided I didn't want to know what was about to happen. I wanted to catch them off guard, so instead of running forward, I bolted to the left. I ended up cutting through a few yards and safely made it to the bar. This happened when I was in grade 6. I was new in school. I just moved into the area and quickly found a group of friends. And this group was Joe, a very average kid who seemed to fit in. But for some reason, he was always the butt of the joke. I soon joined the jokes and bullying, which to me at the time seemed more playful than hurtful. Me and the group usually hung out after school, but never inviting Joe. One day, Joe tells us all that his dad is going away for a family emergency. Joe is expected to stay at his mom's house, but he left him a house key anyway. We decided we'd buy some weed and come over that weekend. Joe was happy to have company. That night, we smoked more than ever before and pressured him to let us drink a few of his dad's beers he found stashed. We were all having fun until one of us fell on a coffee table, shattering glass all over the floor. Joe was upset but seemed to move on. Soon after, Joe thought it would be funny to chase us with a huge butcher's knife. We ran and locked him out of his own room. I took it as a joke, but one of my friends was hysterical with fear and made us keep the door locked. We asked him through the door what the hell he was doing, but he just sat there silently scratching the door with the knife. Several minutes later, we heard him walk away. After a while, I decided that I'd go see what's the matter with him. I walked into a pitch black hall and turned on the light. I saw him sitting down the hall in a chair, hooded and petting something in his hand. I asked him what he was doing and he only replies with, "My precious." In his hand, he had a half-smoked joint. I told him that it was okay and we understand he was joking. The rest of the friends calmed down enough to unlock the door and head home. This left me and one other friend who both lived far away, staying with Joe. Things seemed fine and we set up sleeping bags lined up to each other. The next morning, my friend was stretching his arms when I noticed a patch of red on the back of his shirt. He was cut. A small piece of skin torn away, revealing a tiny bit of white flesh. In Joe's sleeping bag was a shard of glass and the tip was stained red. We asked him why he did it and he just said stone-faced,
I don't know.
Being dumb kids, we assumed it was an accident and forgot about it, never returning to Joe's house. Now in retrospect, I can't help to think how close we could have been to death, and that we may have been the ones that almost pushed him to the point of killing someone. One evening about 8 years ago, it was pouring outside and we got a call from an elderly woman. She called in and said that she was hearing footsteps in her house and she thought there was a ghost inside. She regularly heard the sound of someone walking upstairs, but she lived alone. We went just to check it out and make sure everything was okay. She stayed on the line with the 911 operator because she was frightened. About 3 minutes after she initially called in, she said that there was actually a man standing outside in her backyard, staring at her through her sliding glass door. Petrified, the woman froze in that spot and continued to stare directly at the man. For the next minute or two, she said that he was just standing there, still as could be, staring at her. Eventually the man took off out of sight. When we arrived, about 12 minutes after the call first came in, we went to the front door. I remained in the foyer with the woman. The other officer went to the backyard to see if the man was still hiding out or if there were any traces of him. I spoke with her for several minutes until the other officer returned. He said there was no trace of anyone having been in the backyard. We set off to do a quick sweep before we left to make sure the house was all clear. In our living room, the room that the sliding glass door was in, we discovered a trail of mud and footprints inside the house. I asked the woman if she'd been outside at all that day or if anyone had been over to visit her. She said no, that she lived all alone and that no one had come to visit. The woman was very old, probably around 85, and had very poor eyesight and was hard of hearing, as elderly people tend to be. The woman obviously had seen the man's reflection and mistakenly thought he was in front of her, on the other side of the glass in her backyard. In reality, he had been standing only a few feet behind her in the same room, while she had been talking to 911. Nothing was stolen, broken, or out of place, so we don't know what his intentions were. Who knows what would have happened had she not stayed on the line with the operator. I'm 18 and I live in a lower middle class townhome complex with my divorced mom and my little brother. My mom was out of state for a week at the time, and my little brother was staying at our dad's house for the week. The first day, I come home from a 10-hour shift at the gas station I work at, half a mile down the road from my house. I walk home and head into my basement and smoke a bowl before I fall asleep with my cat. A few hours later, I wake up with an uneasy feeling. It's 1 a.m. and I hear footsteps upstairs. I hear drawers upstairs being opened and immediately grab my switchblade and call 911. They send a squad car out and I stay on the phone. I hear someone coming downstairs. I jump to my feet, dropped my phone and drew my switchblade. The door opens, the light turns on, and in walks a man around my age, wearing a backpack and holding a crowbar. 5'10", 140 pounds, scrawny and shirtless me is standing there with a mere 4-inch blade, locking eyes with a man I've never seen before inside my house holding a crowbar. He jumped just as high as I did when he saw me. With a surge of foolish confidence, I point the knife towards him and told him not to step towards me. Funny, considering his crowbar had a solid foot of reach over my knife. He shouted,
What the fuck? Bro, we didn't think anyone was here. I'm not looking for a fight.
I hear quick and heavy footsteps coming down and a voice saying,
Yo, what the fuck are you doing down here?
A second man emerges through the doorway, this one holding a pistol, and it's pointed at me once he notices me. His eyes light up, as do mine as I realize who I'm looking at. An old elementary school friend that I drifted out of contact with. I had some friends who started talking to him recently, but I heard that he had turned into a recreational Xanax addict. I didn't want to fuck with that, so I never bothered getting back in contact. Turns out that that's exactly why they were robbing my seemingly empty house, for Xanax money.
Josh?
He said in a questioning voice as he lowered the gun.
Fuck, dude, I don't know what to say.
At this point, the door slammed open and the police rushed into the house, eventually coming downstairs and arresting the two. I had a bong on a desk next to my bed, roughly an ounce of weed in the desk, and the basement smelled pretty strongly. Luckily, the cop ended up being cool and just saying, I honestly don't care. They need to just legalize it already. After what you've been through, you need a joint. I was never the delivery boy when I worked at Gino's Pizzeria, but when the new kid called out sick on like his second day, I had to take over for the night. It was a slow Tuesday night for deliveries, so it wasn't too bad. I made 3 normal deliveries within 3 hours. The place closes at 9 on weekends, so I estimated 1 or maybe 2 more deliveries for the night. I picked up the phone to a customer who sounded like the definition of a meth head or something. She had a raspy voice, she stuttered, she forgot what she was saying, she had long pauses. Literally, there was like a 10-second gap between her saying, "Can I just get a..." and regular pizza. It was a huge production getting the address from her. Sounded like she was asking someone in the background what the address was. After she gave me the address, she hung up without me even telling her the price or how long. Well, I was just so excited to meet these people. I told my chef, whose name was actually Mario, I know, a bit cliche, 1 regular pie. 10 minutes later, I was on my way. We live in the middle of absolute nowhere, so each delivery was a bigger trip with a bigger tip. There was a long and dark gravel road through the woods and occasional trailer homes I had to drive through until I finally reached their home. It was a trailer home. The lights were off inside, but I could see the orange glow of a fire coming from out back, and I could hear a woman yelling at someone. When I shut the passenger side door after grabbing the pizza, I noticed the curtains to one of the windows move. Somebody was just watching me. I didn't know if I should knock on their door or go around back. It sounded like there was more than one person back there, so I decided to just go around back. I greeted them and they spun around faster than a bullet. They were disgusting. They looked like typical trailer trash meth heads. The women looked at, I'm guessing her husband, and asked what he's doing here. He then scolded her, saying she was the one who gave the address. They seemed to be standing close together to hide something behind them, and quite frankly, I didn't want to see what it was. I asked them if I should go around front, and they whispered something to each other. The woman pointed at me and told me to wait there. She would go get the money. She went inside, and for the next 2 minutes, I awkwardly stood there, trying not to stare at this scary-looking guy who I knew was staring at me the whole time. Finally, the woman emerged from the house and went back next to the man. She handed the man some money and asked him to count it. She whispered something after that. I was getting very nervous now. I felt as if they were gonna try and rob me or something. I wasn't stupid. The man started counting the money very slow. I mean, really slow. Like 5, 10. I kept my eyes on the woman. She was looking into the woods behind me. And then she nodded her head, staring off behind me, and saw some huge guy approaching me with an axe in his hand. I flung the pizza box at him to try to slow him down, and somehow it worked. Or maybe he just didn't chase me. I got home safely, and I didn't even go back to work that night. I'm happy that was the only night I had to deliver. So if you live in the suburbs or city, sure, be a pizza boy. But if you live in the middle of nowhere, maybe try the supermarket instead. The holidays have never been a good time for me. My dad left when I was 10. Yes, it's tragic, but nothing out of the norm. He left us on Christmas Eve and never came home. Said he was going out for some wrapping paper, and that was the last we saw of him. For 25 years, my mother had learned to deal with this. A slow process for a woman so much in love. Dad was everything to her, to all of us. Growing up without a father was tough, but again, nothing out of the norm. Lots of my friends growing up only had one parent. You were more abnormal if your parents had stayed together. At least that's how we all coped with it. Mom died 2 years ago, and now I was in charge of hosting the family Christmas at our old house. The house that was Mom and Dad's so many years ago. None of us wanted to come back to a place full of so many bad memories. But we all knew it's what she would have wanted if she was still alive. My younger brother and sister were late again this year. Typical. I could never count on either of them to be on time for anything. None of us were great cooks, so we opted to have pizza delivered. We ate in silence, then spent the next hour and a half trimming the tree. We all plopped down on the couch and dust spurted out from the cushions. "It's freezing in here, Joe," my brother Danny said. "Anyone know how to start a fire?" "I don't," Jen said, and both turned to look at me. The eldest sibling gets all the stupid jobs. It must be some kind of intergalactic law. There was already wood in the house, so we gathered what we could and tried to get a nice, warm fire going. We weren't having much luck. Smoke filled the room, and I fiddled with the fireplace and realized something was blocking the airflow. "This old piece of crap house," Jen said. "It doesn't surprise me nothing works around here." She was right. Mom had never bothered to fix anything since Dad had left, including the fireplace. Danny and I had offered several times to fix things around her place, but she wouldn't hear of it. She wanted everything kept just how it was, and believed someday Dad would come back. "I think I know what's wrong," I said as I continued working. That's when I smelled something awful and heard a rattling sound. A corpse, now a pile of dry bones and clothed in a Santa suit, hit the bottom with a thud. I jumped back and clamped my hands over my mouth. Jen screamed and Danny dropped to the floor while letting out painful sobs. A red, velvet bag came down next, filled with gifts labeled for each of us. Turns out Dad came back after all. I worked night audit at this semi-swanky hotel next to the airport. One night, I get a call from a lady in 204. She says there was arguing, loud banging and crying coming out of 206. I check the computer. No one is checked into that room due to maintenance issues. I called my supervisor to see what to do. She tells me to call on-site security and follow them up with a key. I decide to be the bigger man and go up anyways. As we get off the elevator, we can hear the crying. It's loud. My heart starts racing as we near the door, so I hand the key to the security guard. The next 5 minutes seem to happen in slow motion. He opens the door and immediately flicks on the light. Keep in mind, 206 is on the second floor, and the only door in was by me. This was at like 3 a.m. and there was no one around. As we enter the room, the shower is on. The steam is coming from under the door. There's only one lamp on in the room. It's super cold. There's a lady in a red lacy bra and black panties with super red hair curled up crying in the bed. She was facing away from us. As Frank approached her, he asked if everything was okay. She sort of stopped crying and rolled over. When she did, a wave of horror came over me. She was super pale, covered in blood. She was just staring behind us. That's when we realized the shower had stopped and the door was open. There was a man about 6'5" standing in the doorway. As we turned around, cops tased him and arrested him. Turns out he was a rapist who hides in hotel rooms, kidnaps women who stay there and cuts them open. To this day, I will never go to that hotel again. This was in January of 2016. I'd gone up to the shopping center that's about a 30-minute walk from my house. While I would usually take the bus home from the shopping center near my house, the bus wasn't due for another 45 minutes by the time I had done what I needed to, and my 10-year-old brother was at home alone. My mom has no problem with me leaving my brother home alone for an hour or two, because he can take care of himself for that long. So I decided to walk back to my house instead of waiting basically an hour for the bus. On the way home, I saw a man, maybe 40 to 45 years old, walking in the opposite direction to me. As he turned the corner to walk towards me, I got the impression that he didn't look right. Probably because as he was walking, he was just staring at me. As he walked past me, I got a sinking feeling, like when you're on a plane and it starts to descend. As I continued to walk, I felt like someone was following me. So when I got to the bus stop, I made it look like I was checking the bus times, which gave me an excuse to turn around. And once I did, my heart started racing. This fucker had changed direction and turned 180 degrees to walk in the same direction as me. He was walking faster than he was before, and this freaked me out. I was close to the road that I would usually turn up to get to my street. I turned up the street and had walked about 25 meters up it when I heard crunching of a chip packet that I knew I had passed. He was still behind me. I decided I'd cross the road to put more distance between us, and to also get to the street that was across from me. From here, I could go a longer way home. This longer way home had a lot of corners, making following me a lot harder to do. This street also had a lot of teenagers who were at home, due to it being summer holidays. So if the guy tried anything, there were a lot of people who would likely hear me screaming. So I was going along the long route when I turned to look behind me, and he was still there. This is where I started my plan to get back to my house. I turned the next corner and sprinted along the path as quietly as I could. I was on my house's street. If I was going straight home, I would have gone left, but I went straight ahead towards a smallish park that was just up the street from my house. The reason I did this was because I could go up through the park and around to get to my house. As I was crossing the road to get to the park, I looked back, and I saw him jogging up the path I'd just come from. He saw me and started sprinting towards me. Luckily, I had a 150-meter head start. I ran through the park, up and around to the left. The area behind the park is like a maze, so this gave me an advantage. Once I was behind the park and out of his sight, I continued sprinting for a house that had an old shed in its front yard. The shed was empty, and the door was open as always. So I hid in there, able to look out through a mirrored window, and he was looking around for me. He then walked the way that I was planning on going to get to my house. I was still too scared to leave the shed, so I waited for about 10 minutes before I saw him walking back towards the park on his phone. And I heard part of what he was saying to the other end.
Yeah, I lost her, but I think she lives around here. She's a crafty bitch though.
After he passed, I waited another 10 minutes before leaving the shed and sprinting towards my house. I called my mom, who called the police, who in turn called me. I gave a description of the man and refused to leave the house alone for a week. I've never seen him again, and the police report hasn't come up with anything.
Stranger Stories. This encounter happened when I was about 10 years old. It was in the middle of summer and my sister and I were home alone. Both our mom and grandmother were busy, so they could not stay home with us. We were used to being home alone during the summer, so it was not a big deal. During this day, I had gotten up and started to play The Sims 2 in our kitchen. My sister was watching TV in our den. A few hours into gaming, I thought I heard the doorbell ring. At first, I thought it was my game, but my sound was off. I asked my sister if she heard the doorbell, to which she replied she hadn't. I brushed it off and went back to playing my game. About 10 minutes later, I see a reflection on my computer of a man in a suit. His hands cupped around his eyes, looking through the glass door behind me. I turn around to be face to face with this strange man I had never seen before. I had no idea how long he had been watching me. He gives me the biggest, creepiest smile I had ever seen, and waves at me like he knew me from somewhere. I screamed, calling my sister, who hadn't noticed the man yet. Scared and partially frozen in fear, my sister grabs the house phone quickly, calling our grandmother. This guy was wearing a full-on black suit that did not fit him. If not strange enough that this guy was wearing a full suit while it's 99 degrees out there, he was also carrying a weird-looking briefcase. All the salespeople I'd seen only ever had a clipboard or maybe a couple flyers, but this man had something else. The guy proceeds to walk around our house to the back door. During his little trip, he must have seen there wasn't a car in the driveway, indicating no one was home. As I was getting up to hide, the man reached down, grabbed the doorknob, and started to jiggle it forcefully. Thankfully, the door was locked. He looked at me smiling, gestured at me to come unlock the door for him. All the noise he had been making had set off our 75-pound dog. No way she was going to let the guy get to us if he did get in. My sister tells me our grandmother is on her way, and she wants us to hide in the back of the house in her room until she could get home. My sister hands me the phone, then runs into the kitchen to grab the biggest knife we have. I can hear her yelling at the guy that we called the cops. She comes back into the room with me and we shut the door. She tells me that after she lied to the guy about calling the cops, he started laughing uncontrollably, extremely loud. A little while later, We hear the door open and my grandmother calling us. She tells us she did not see any man anywhere in sight. She had walked around the whole house before unlocking the door. She also thought it was weird that if he was a salesperson, he would have left a note saying, "Sorry, we missed you." She ended up taking the rest of the day off to stay with us. It's been 11 years since this encounter, and I still don't want to know what his intentions were, or what was in his mysterious briefcase.
It was a cold night in late January. I had just gotten off work at around 9 p.m. and was driving back to my apartment on the other side of town. As I arrived, I scanned my card in the booth in front of the underground parking door and drove inside to my reserved spot. The upside of having a reserved parking spot was that obviously no one would take it. The disadvantage of having this particular spot was that the elevator happened to be all the way on the other side of the lot. So I parked my car, got out, locked it, and began my journey to the other side of the garage. At night, the building turns half of the lights off down there, so it was really dark. The few lights that are on are also really dim. The whole place was a ghost town, there was no one around. It was honestly kind of eerie and quiet, other than the faint hum of the lights. As I was walking, I started hearing this sound. It sounded like a faint tapping sound, but on like something hollow, like tapping on glass. I kept walking and tried to ignore it, but it seemed the more I walked, the louder it got. At one point I stopped and started darting my eyes around looking for the source, and I found it. I could see 10 yards away, at one of the parked cars, there was a finger on the other side of the car, reaching up and tapping the glass of the window. This one really stiff, pale index finger. No other body parts I could see other than the finger. I tried to look underneath the car to see who was there, but another car parked next to it was blocking my view. I moved to the next row over to avoid walking past whoever that was and just kept walking. But not even 30 seconds later, I started hearing the tapping again. What the hell, I thought. I started looking again, and this time it was a parked car to my right, another finger on the other side of it tapping the glass. This car I could see under, and sure enough, I could make out someone kneeling down behind the car. I'm not the confrontational type at all, so my solution was to once again avoid it by moving 2 rows over this time to get away from these people and just start walking faster to the other side of the garage. I figured I would start running if I needed to. As I was walking, I was hearing these sounds from behind me, like scraping and shuffling sounds. I started walking faster. Then I felt my heart drop as I heard the glass tapping sound again. I did a 360 to see where it was coming from, and I saw another car to my right with a finger tapping on the glass behind it. Then the tapping got twice as loud, and I realized it was because 2 other cars to my left also had people tapping their fingers on the glass behind them. I was getting fed up with whatever kind of stupid prank this was. I ran towards the nearest car with someone behind it, shouting like a madman with my fists out. By the time I made it to the car, however, there was no one there. But there was something left behind. Something that made me feel sick to my stomach, and unable to even move for a second other than just stare at it. Lying on the ground behind the car was a severed human index finger. The same one that had been tapping on the glass. I heard the tapping sound again, this time from behind me, and I spun around to see another finger tapping on the glass of a car that was 3 cars away. That's when I decided to start running. I sprinted all the way to the other side of the garage, then turned to the right and ran until I got to the elevator. I sat there smashing the button frantically. I could sense presences moving behind me and people watching me. As soon as the elevator door slid open, I squeezed in and smashed the button for my floor. Right as the elevator doors closed, I saw another severed finger thrown forcefully at the door. I heard it land with a thump as the doors closed, and then the elevator started moving up. I made it to my apartment, locked the door, and collapsed on the couch to gather my thoughts. A few minutes later, I picked up the phone and called the building security and explained the situation to one guy. I wasn't sure if he was taking me seriously or not, but he said him and a couple guys would check it out. About an hour later, as I was watching TV getting ready for bed, he called me back and said no one was in the underground parking unit, and they didn't find any severed fingers. I thanked him and went to bed. By far the scariest thing that's ever happened to me. This was 3 years ago now, and I no longer live in that complex. I moved out as soon as I went to college a few months after the incident, which I had planned to do anyway. I was browsing Facebook Marketplace looking for new snowboarding boots. My $200 pair had just been stolen a week prior as I had carelessly left them unattended at the resort. I wasn't looking to drop another $200 or even $100 on a new pair, nor did I have the money to do so. I spent most of the day checking the listings and refreshing the page until a listing that was just posted caught my eye. It was for a brand new, barely used pair of Burton snowboard boots in my size for only $75. I went to message the seller, this guy named Mark. His profile picture was a grainy selfie of him in sunglasses. He responded almost instantly to my message, and after a bit of correspondence, he was down to meet that same night. It was currently 9:30, and he told me to come to his house at 10 since he would just be getting home from work by then. He sent me the address, and I looked to see where it was on maps. It appeared to be a ranch with a long dirt road that led to it off of the main road, completely encased by woods. I live in Parkdale, Oregon, so this was not uncommon at all. In fact, my house looked almost the exact same. 10 minutes after he had sent me his address, he messaged me again with an odd request. He told me when I came down his driveway to not come all the way up to his house and instead park the car hidden from view of the house, because he didn't want his mom, who was sick, to wake up. I thought it was weird for sure, but wasn't concerned. I had my mind set on those $75 boots. The time came for me to head over, which was about a 20-minute drive. Normally longer, but I tend to drive fast on those empty country roads at night. My truck was actually scraping against leaves as I drove down it. I parked my truck and killed the engine right at the bend in the road before the house and got out. As I turned the corner to approach the house, I noticed it was pitch black. Not a single light was on. It was just a silhouette. Another strange thing I picked up on was that there were no other cars in sight. I had to navigate towards the house relying entirely on moonlight. I genuinely couldn't see a thing, which is why I didn't pick up on the figure standing about halfway between me and the house until I was right in front of him. It gave me a fright, but I didn't show it. "Mark?" I asked. The figure said yeah, and to follow him around back. It was so dark, all I could see of this Mark person was that he was wearing a big jacket. I couldn't see his face at all. He quickly turned around and began walking in the direction of the house. I followed like 5 feet behind, growing increasingly uneasy. As we got closer and closer to the house, my eyes adjusted, and I began to see more and more of it. It appeared to be in terrible condition. The steps to the front porch were broken, and there was junk all over the place. I looked up at the windows. A couple of them were completely shattered open. That's when I stopped walking and just stared up at the house. There was no way anyone could have been living in there. Then I looked back towards this Mark figure leading me into complete darkness. He had stopped as well. And although, like I said, I couldn't see anything out there, I knew he was looking at me. I didn't even say anything. I just turned and ran for it. I knew for a fact he was chasing me. As I rounded the bend in the dirt road and approached my truck, I saw two men knelt down doing something to my tires. I yelled hey at them and they ran off into the woods. I threw myself in the driver's seat and started the engine, ready to floor it in reverse. As the headlights went on, I saw the group of men standing in the road in front of me. I drove straight home and went to Marketplace to report the ad, but it was already taken down. The only thing I could think to do next was call the cops, so I did. The investigation yielded no results, but the house was indeed abandoned, if that's even worth mentioning at this point. I don't think I'll be using Facebook Marketplace again anytime soon.